So, I think I broke the game. That title is not clickbait. This is probably the highest damage build in the entire game, while also being the easiest to maintain and the most reliable in combat. Stick around to the end of the video because I have a ton of info to help you get more damage and you won't want to miss it. So, this is the newest S-tier Mastery 200 certified meta build. This is my Doomerang build. This build is like those ads you see on the adult websites where it says like, one easy trick that devs don't want you to know about. Your damage will grow an extra 36 inches, digits. With this build, your damage will impress all of your friends and you will be clearing higher masteries like you never could before. Prepare to see a lot more boomerangs on the leaderboard with this build. This isn't just some bizarro shot build, nor is this just some grenade spam or infinite traversal build either. This is the kind of build where you will be redlining the whole time, never standing still because one stray bullet or stationary crystal apparently could easily kill you. This is the ultimate high-risk, high-reward playstyle. You sacrifice all health bonuses, all damage reduction, and most of your shield regeneration from your shield harvesting to push your damage that much further. And as you saw from that little gameplay, the damage you can deal with this build is just, it's just stupid. Before this build, I was dealing like 50,000 damage per bullet with my SMG and feeling great, but now I am the destroyer's worst nightmare. Even the annoying flash-infused ones don't stand a chance once you get them to stop teleporting around like an unmedicated ADHD kid who had his first friggin' Red Bull. Now, even though this build has the durability of a wet paper bag, you can still survive. I have completed Ivy's Incursion and the Crystal one as well on Mastery 60+, and I've had other people run this build and they're on Mastery 200. So just because you are squishy does not mean you can't play Boomerang the way he's intended. You can still credit card the enemy's cheeks with your shotgun, you just need to be a bit more careful and again, more agile. Movement is key. That's kind of why I call this build Doomerang, because it feels like you're playing Doom Eternal on Nightmare, and the same lessons apply here. Movement is imperative, and the better you get with the movement and the combat, the smoother the combat will be, even if things are mega ouchy. Getting things like ammo, grenades, or extra damage buffs are very important, and having a routine in combat helps. All we need is a super shotgun in the game to complete it. Oh my god, Rocksteady, please add that to the game. Just like a sawed-off with like a sneeze worth of range, but huge damage. And 2 shots before reloading, oh my god, and it could even have some like cool unique fire affliction perk too. Please do that for me, that'd be so cool. Anyway, so in this video I will be taking you through my glass cannon Doomerang build that will help you push higher and higher into the masteries, bullying those dang destroyers as punishment for having a frickin' nuke button for a soft spot like a giant pizza-faced baby that explodes half of the damn map. This video will include a section that goes over the hows and whys of the build. The reason I like to include this in my build videos is to help the newer players understand the reasoning behind certain playstyle requirements, gear choices, or even how the math adds up. That's right, there will be a very simplified math class in this video because it is very important. The math section will be after we go over the main gear and talent points and of course everything else. And I will add a timestamp on screen for the people who don't want to sit down and listen to Professor J talk for a while. So now without further ado, let's jump into this. The first thing we're going to go over is the gear. This build uses the base fundamentals from my last video, which I will include in a card in the top right hand corner for those of you who have not seen it and want more info on the premise of this build. But like I said, this build does use the core idea of the new shield harvest meta that we started after Frieza and my buddy Manny sat down and made a beautiful meta baby together. I then sat down later on and did even more testing to it to turn it into a glass cannon, basically trying to sacrifice all of the shield gain from shield harvesting, but in return, you get a huge damage increase. The first item that scales our damage is the famous stacked deck shotgun. I am sure you've heard of this gun before, but for those of you who have not, here's a quick summary of what the weapon does. It comes in 3 varieties that I've found so far. A pump action version that feels like you're playing as Doom Guy, aka Doomer. It also comes in burst fire and fully automatic versions as well. The weapon's unique perk says that each successful hit on an enemy with this firearm causes it to take 15% more damage from all sources for 10 seconds, up to a maximum of 750% extra damage. What that means is that each bullet from an SMG, for example, will count as a successful hit. Even if you hit the Green Lantern helicopters or the armored grunts or brutes, it stacks more bonus damage. But for shotguns, this gets even better because shotguns have pellets, as shown by the damage per hit on the item card. You will see mine has 291 damage with 30 pellets. That times 30 is the pellet count. And so when you use a shotgun version of a stacked deck, each pellet that hits the enemy will give you 15% extra bonus damage. So if you are right up next to the enemy and all 30 pellets hit the enemy, it will add 30 stacks of the bonus damage immediately. So after shooting the enemy one time with my shotgun, the enemy is already at 450% extra bonus damage from all sources. So after 2 shots, they are taking the full 750% extra damage. It's just insane. And as long as you keep shooting the enemy, the 10-second timer does not go down, so they take 750% more damage the entire time. The augments I chose for the stack deck are 15% damage to grunts, 15% damage to brutes, and 1% shield regeneration on crits with this firearm. This is one of the only things actually giving us our shield back, and shields are pretty important to this build, but I will go into that a bit later. The next item we have is more of a stat stick, meaning that we don't really use it, we just enjoy the extra bonus stats or buffs that it can give us. That weapon is the Black Mask's Bulletstorm, simply for the villain synergy that you can get with the Bane gear called Terror Behind the Mask. The weapon augments don't really affect your character at all, so the augments don't really matter unless you plan to actually use the weapon. Which is why I went ahead and I added 5% ammo gained on crits, 20% sniper damage, and an additional 50% damage to crazed enemies. So if you want to switch to the sniper rifle for any reason, it can still hit very, very hard and synergize with the theme of the build. The villain synergy that you get from this gun says that each non-vehicular enemy that you kill builds up stacks for Terror Behind the Mask, and when it reaches 5 stacks, the next enemy that you craze will deal 500% more damage. But you also deal 500% more damage while it's alive. This is a huge damage bonus, and when it procs, you will see a major difference in your damage. The next item for the build is extremely important as well. It's the Angry Fates melee weapon. This melee weapon says that shield harvesting no longer gives you shield pickups, but instead gives you damage buff pickups. This is basically the main item that makes this extremely squishy and takes away your safety net. It makes you rely on your movement and combat skills, because we all know that the best defense is a good offense. I will go into why I chose this melee weapon over the Come At Me's higher shield harvesting damage later on in the math class portion of the video, but trust me, this one's better. You might also be wanting to try out the melee weapon that increases your melee damage up to 950% extra, but that one's not as good because the 950% is of base damage, not anything else. So again, this one is still better. The grenade we are using for this build is the tier 3 Bane grenade called Reign of Bane. The biggest reason we use this grenade over something else is because it completes the 3-piece Bane set. That set bonus is huge for our damage and blends immaculately with the infinite traversal ability of the shield harvest meta. The 1-piece bonus says that you deal 4% more damage to an enemy for each 1% of their health that is missing. So, if they lose 10% of their health, you now gain 40% more damage to that enemy. The 2-piece bonus says that critical hits on enemies below 50% trigger Bane's Fury. Bane's Fury increases damage dealt by 50% and damage to crazed enemies by 50% as well for 60 seconds. And each time you stack Bane's Fury, you get a 5% chance to cause the enemy to explode on death and craze all of the enemies within 10 meters. And Bane's Fury can stack 15 times. That means by hitting 15 criticals on an enemy that is below half health, you instantly get a 750% damage boost to both your regular damage and your damage to crazed enemies. And then the final bonus for 3 pieces of tier 3 Bane gear says that all enemies you you hit with your traversal attack become crazed. And if you kill them with the traversal attack, you get 5 stacks of Bane's Fury. And for each enemy that you kill while you have Bane's Fury active, you generate 10% traversal attack resource. So as you can see, this entire set is just perfect for this build. The bonus damage is crazy. Yes, I'm making that pun 2 videos in a row. And it also benefits our goal of using the traversal not as a source of damage, but as an applicator. And it helps us get the traversal resources back much faster. So for the grenade augments, I went with 15% extra grenade damage to grunts because duh, 20% grenade damage because duh, and 3% traversal attack resource gained from each enemy hit by our grenades because duh. And the Rain of Bane is a cluster grenade, so you basically hit everything. But I only use my grenades in 2 situations. 1, if I'm in a pinch and need more traversal resource back ASAP to avoid dying. And 2, if I'm trying to finish the incursion quicker, I just spam grenades at the large crowds of grunts to get points back faster. But other than that, this is not a grenade-focused build. But that being said, because of all of our extra damage bonuses that we can stack, our grenades still do ridiculously big damage. Now, for the shield that I use, it's the tier 3 Bane shield. Just like with the grenade, we use this to contribute to the set bonuses for tier 3 Bane. And for the augments I chose, we have 7.5% crit chance, because I really couldn't find anything more beneficial unless you want more Suicide Strike resource generation. But I also chose 30% shotgun ammo reserve capacity, and plus 50% damage while shield is full. The shield augment is going to be a repeating augment on our gear, but there's a reason for that, which I will go further into during the math portion. But on the shield, we also get an additional 100% damage and take 50% less damage if there are at least 4 crazed enemies nearby. So it's definitely a huge bonus to have the shield on. And then for the traversal mod and the neck bomb mod, we are using the hack set for the 2-piece set bonus. I covered this in my last video as well, but basically this set gives us an extra 3% passive resource generation for our traversal attack and our suicide strike. Our traversal attack does 50% less damage, but makes everything we hit instantly shield harvestable. And also, suicide strike kills give you 7 seconds of unlimited ammo. So these 2 items are the core 2 pieces for the entire shield harvesting meta. But for this build, I chose to put on an extra 15% damage to grunts and brutes, and then 50% more damage to enemies that are within 5 meters of me. You could also swap this one out for the extra damage when they're more than 25 meters away from you as well. So, like I said, we are right up in there smelling it like we're in a comic convention. And for the neck mod, I chose 15% more melee damage to grunts, 20% more melee damage to brutes, and finally, another plus 50% damage while our shield is full. Like I said in my last video, melee damage scales shield harvest damage, so you really want to stack that as much as you can. And then finally we have the Little Osito Bane Lucky Charm to complete the 3-piece bonus for the tier 3 Bane set. We've got 5% ammo gained on crits, so we just don't run out of ammo on our shotgun, 25% crit damage, and a third plus 50% damage while our shield is full augment. So as you can see from this build, it is an S tier build and does require specific gear to work at the highest possible level with the highest damage. But this is going to give you something to grind for, and once you get it, you are going to be the damage dealer for your group, while you also buff their damage because of the stacked deck. It's really just a beautiful thing. And if you have multiple people running this build, I can only imagine how you would just pop every brute like a purple alien pimple. But now for the talent trees, here's what the overall talent trees look like. Feel free to pause and copy this, but I will also go over some of the must-have talent nodes that will give you an EP so big that heartily frickin' salutes it. And just so this video isn't like super crazy long, I will try to go a little bit faster through this part, but still give you all of the important info. So in the pink tree, we have the very first node Jackpot that can later be transformed into Trickster, but we aren't going to transform Jackpot for this build. It gives you 20% bonus firearm damage when you have 5 times combo, which is what we're using it for. This is just great because even though it doesn't actually seem to scale shield harvest damage directly, it can of course buff our shotgun damage, which will directly result in bigger numbers from the shield harvest. Again, just trust me, I have sized the crap out of this one. Then we have the next major node called Going Hunting. It makes enemies take 50% more damage from firearms for 10 seconds after you melee them. So every time we melee, we reapply this 50% damage buff. I don't know if this applies to all the people in your party, but we'll find out when multiplayer is working. Then we have the node Shotgunner, which gives you a 25% increased chance of shield harvesting with a shotgun. This one makes the build flow so much better because it's based on shotgun hits, which, as we learned from the stacked deck, counts each pellet from the trigger pull. So with 15 to 30 pellets hitting, you basically guarantee them to be shield harvestable after every single shot, as long as you have the proper combo. I think you need like 20 combo or 10 combo, I think, to do this. Then we have Sucker Punch, which is unbelievably amazing for this build, and you should never take this one off. It'll make sense in just a bit, but it takes 50% of your damage from the last 5 critical hits and adds it to your next melee hit. And like I mentioned before, melee damage directly scales your shield harvest damage, so this is amazing. Then we also have Haterade, which increases your shotgun damage by 10% for each enemy within 10 meters. So this is why I selectively use my grenades and why you really want to be in the middle of all of those brutes, because being surrounded by all of those big burly brutes makes you feel like that one meme that I cannot describe without getting demonetized. It's your happy place, the place where you pull an Uno reverse card and whip out your long hard shotgun and tell the brutes to bend over and make the destroyers become the destroyed. The last important node for the pink tree is real big numbers. This one is amazing, and the name tells you exactly why. Basically, this node gives us the ability to stack our combo up to 70 instead of only 50, and the benefit of doing that is at the top of the blue tree, Boomerang's tier 0 talent says that for every 3 combo we have, we get 2% increased damage to enemies within 10 meters. So now, with our new 70 times combo, we get an extra 46% damage increase to enemies within 10 meters, instead of only the 33% like we'd get with a 50 times combo. But you might be wondering why I chose the 46% bonus damage over Trickster's 100%. Well, Trickster says it gives you increased damage, but from my testing, this wasn't giving as big of an increase to my damage as what Real Big Numbers does. I noticed that when I swapped to Real Big Numbers for the 46% increased damage instead, it combined with Jackpot's 20% firearm damage due to what I believe is either a multiplicative interaction between these two skills, or this build just cares more about firearm damage in general, or maybe both. But when I tested this changeout, I noticed my damage numbers were stacking higher way faster. And I think part of that is due to the increased firearm damage, and I'll explain why boosting your firearm damage is important in just a bit. But then looking at the blue tree, we have the BoomerCon node. This node then turns into Admiral Boomerang as well later on, and this node gives you an extra 60% damage and 25% damage reduction, which is a huge help to be just a bit tankier. The next one we have is Third Time's a Charm, where meleeing 3 different enemies gives you 15 combo with a 15-second cooldown. This one is just great for keeping the combo up, since a lot of damage bonuses for us come from our high combos. Then we have the Crowd Control node as well, which gives you an extra 20% melee damage while airborne. This one is amazing, and it's why you will see me airborne when I'm shield harvesting or jumping after each shotgun shot, trying to make sure that the shield harvest damage is just as big and high as it possibly can be. And then the last node in the blue tree that you need to put on, just like Sucker Punch, and actually it's because of how it combines and synergizes with the Sucker Punch node that I mentioned before, is Bonanza. This node takes 50% of the damage from your last 3 melee hits and adds it to your next firearm critical hit. And, as we learned in the last video, shield harvesting counts as melee damage. So if you hit a 10 million damage shield harvest, then another 5 million harvest, and then a 15 million harvest, that's 30 million damage. Bonanza will then take 50% of that 30 million shield harvest damage and add it to your next firearm critical hit. So you would basically have an extra 15 million damage on your next shotgun critical hit. And then Sucker Punch takes the last 5 shotgun critical hits and adds 50% of that damage to your next melee hit. And because we had an extra 15 million shield harvest damage divided into our shotgun pellets from Bonanza, plus the other crits that we did in the meantime, Sucker Punch will then take 50% of all that last crit damage and add it right back into our next melee or shield harvest. That's why stacking things like firearm damage from Jackpot is better than Trickster. The extra firearm damage helps us bring up those shotgun crits, which will then stack into our melee, making our shield harvests even higher, and the cycle will continue until the enemy pops. So these two nodes literally feed each other damage and allow us to repeatedly stack extra damage over and over and over and over again until the brutes and destroyers are calling us daddy. But continuing along with the talent trees, the first node in the purple tree that is a must-have is Flat Out. This node also increases your critical damage by 20% for 10 seconds after using your Speed Force Gauntlet. That is so good for this build because even though critical damage isn't normally the best one to have, we can get an easy little bump to our gun damage just by using our boomerang, teleports, or traversal attacks as well. Just using the gauntlet in general gives us a crit damage bonus, which is really nice. Another amazing node to pick in the purple tree is Quick and Dirty. This one gives you an extra 10% crit chance for every 10 meters between you and the target. That sounds kinda lame at first, but it basically allows you to be a bit further away from the big enemies and still land the crits that we would need for damage stacking. And then when they blow up from boom, you might actually be far enough away to survive the blast. The next node we're going to look at is Circle of Life. This node gives us one combo for each enemy that we hit with our traversal attack, and because we can use our traversal attack infinitely if we want to, this keeps us at 50 or 70 combo indefinitely basically. The next node in the purple tree that we're going to look at is Slow-Mo Shootout. It gives us an extra 50% critical hit damage if the enemies are farther than 10 meters. And if they're closer than 10 meters, you have an extra 25% shield harvest chance. So like I said previously, even though crit damage isn't the best normally due to how it scales, having a little extra this easily is amazing. And then the extra shield harvest chance helps us be a bit more confident while in the big groups of enemies. And when you combine that with the previous nodes from the pink tree, you basically never stop shield harvesting everything. But now, for the final node for not only the purple tree, but the build as a whole, we have Ultimate Speed Force Mambo. This one is unbelievably good for our build because it gives us 15% more melee damage and firearm damage per enemy that we kill while our squad ultimate is active, and it lasts for 30 seconds as well. So you have a good chunk of time to pew pew stab the enemies with the extra bonus damage, and it only requires 10 enemies to get the max damage bonus. So just throw out like 1 or 2 grenades and you'll either have the full damage buff or you'll have a majority of it, especially with the firearm incursions and all of the little grunts in the front. And now let's go over the squad points that I have chosen for this build. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the ones to aim for first, then tell you the ones you should get after. That way, if you're a lower squad level, you know which ones to prioritize for your early levels. So the first one's easy. You want to max out melee damage because that directly scales the shield harvest damage, as I've mentioned like 6 times. That will give you as much base damage for the other damage bonuses to scale off of even more. The second one to help with that is shield harvest damage because that's your main source of damage besides your shotgun. But speaking of shotgun damage, that's the next one you should focus your points into. Just these 3 nodes alone will be a huge help to your build's synergy. You'll get an additional 20% melee damage, 20% shield harvest damage, and 20% shotgun damage. And even though these ones I believe scale off of the base damage, it's still a huge help. And since melee damage, like I said, increases the shield harvest damage, you are getting a huge boost to your shield harvest damage. And then you mix that into the talent synergy between Sucker Punch and Bonanza, and you are getting redonkulous scaling and damage stacking. But if you are a higher level and have more points to spend, or maybe you just want to know what nodes to put points into next once you get more levels, here's what I'd recommend next. The next one should be critical damage. That will stack with the bonuses that our talents and augments give us, allowing your shotgun to stack even more damage into your melee and shield harvest like I mentioned earlier. Then, put points into damage while airborne. Since you float when you melee in the air, it's basically a constant damage buff. Then you should put points into damage to brutes, and then damage to grunts after that. These two I'm pretty sure are a smaller additive bonus, just like all of the other ones are, but they're still nice to have. But if you still have points because you haven't seen the sun in the last month, or you got really well acquainted with Gizmo during his car rides, start putting points into bonus damage at 50 combo. This will just be up all the time basically, and so you might as well lean into it. Then after that, put points into squad ultimate duration. This one will let you have more time searching for those destroyers' lunch money. So be sure to check all of their crevices. You have plenty of time. And then you should focus on damage during the squad ultimate next. But for those whose transformation into Golem is fully complete, you can also put points into the 2 nodes for damage to Batman and Flash-infused enemies. But don't worry, we won't take your precious or open the curtains on you. We know the sun's the enemy. But now, it's time for math class. This is super important knowledge because this knowledge and information helps us make better builds, but also gives us a clearer understanding on why the heck our damage just spiked from 10 million to 150 million or higher. I have done a lot of testing for this build to try to make it the most efficient it possibly can be, but I know there's still more to learn. That's why this video took me so long to make, was because I was getting as much accurate information as I possibly could. Even if I'm wrong, I wanted to get as close to right as I could for you guys. So if you want to help me test different things, or if you already have tested different stuff, let me know in the comments down below. I'm the hyper nerd who loves this stuff, and right now I'm going to be the dad who forces my interest upon you. But before we jump into the numbers like it's the Black Ops 1 campaign...
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean?
I wanted to kindly ask Rocksteady if we could get some kind of way of telling which percentages or talents are multiplicative and which ones are additive. Something like Diablo would be perfect. Just give us a little settings toggle that adds a little tiny X in parentheses if it's multiplicative, and a little plus sign in parentheses if it's a value that's additive. Or even some kind of way to distinguish whether a skill or perk is scaling all damage, like the final number that we see being dealt to the enemy, or if it's adding a % more of base damage when it says increases damage dealt, or when you see one that says you deal X% more damage. This would be very, very helpful when testing. But the first thing I want to go over is all of the ways we are scaling our damage higher to hit these crazy freaking numbers, and how I believe the math actually works. And if someone from Rocksteady wants to chime in and educate me on the official damage formulas, damage scaling, or any of that stuff, my DMs are always open. This build has a ton of damage bonuses, but there's 3 big ones that we can keep up basically all of the time. That's what she said. So as we discussed in the gear portion, one of the most reliable damage buffs that we have is from our stacked deck. That weapon gives us a 750% damage buff from all damage sources to the enemy affected. I could be wrong, but this 750% doesn't appear to be multiplicative with other damage buffs, but what it does do is take the final damage number that you deal and multiplies it by 7.5. Another extremely reliable damage buff we have is the Angry Face melee weapon. The damage buffs from this melee weapon drop just from shield harvesting an enemy, and you get 3 of them for each harvest. Each red damage buff adds about 100% more damage to all sources and can stack 10 times. So after 4 shield harvests, you now have 1000% bonus damage. And because of how often we can shield harvest things, you will just cover the ground with these little red damage buff things. This is why we choose this melee weapon over the Come At Me. Now, even though that 1000% bonus damage doesn't seem to be the same kind of bonus damage as the stacked deck, I might be wrong, but it seems to be just an additive bonus that works off of base damage, not final damage dealt. So it will be a boost to your damage, but I didn't notice my damage getting multiplied by like 10 times or something. The third damage buff we're going to keep up all the time is the 2-piece bonus for the tier 3 Bane items. This bonus activates when you critical hit an enemy that is below 50% health. And this damage buff can be activated per pellet of a shotgun as well. So you can potentially hit 1 shot and get the full 15 stacks of bonus damage. And if we read that perk's description again, it says that you gain increased damage and damage to craze. From my testing, I think it's a general overall damage buff, just like the Angry Face or possibly the stacked deck. So you end up with 15 stacks of 50% bonus damage, which adds up to 750% for each one. What that means in theory is that if you are fighting an enemy, you will get the 750% damage buff in general, but if that enemy is crazed, you will get another 750% on top of that, totaling at 1500% more damage just by landing constant crits with your shotgun. So in practice, all it takes is 4 shield harvests, 1 or 2 crits with a stacked deck, and then use an affliction grenade or melee and you could get up to 3650% extra damage. And that's not even adding the bonuses from your talent tree nodes, augments, or the mutator damage buffs that we have active this season. If we add the talent tree stats, it's a little hard to calculate exactly because we have stuff like Going Hunting that gives you 50% more damage to firearms for 10 seconds after each melee hit. And then we have the real big numbers node that gives you 46% increased damage dealt, or Admiral Boomerang that increases damage dealt by 60%. The theoretical estimate is about 430% extra damage from different talent tree nodes, and that's not including the Haterade node that increases shotgun damage by 10% per enemy within 10 meters, or Trickster's 100% increase to damage dealt. Those could add even more to it potentially as well. And then if you start adding up the augments on our items, we have like 20% melee damage, 40% shield harvest damage, 40% shotgun damage, 30% damage to grunts, 30% damage to brutes, 15% melee damage to grunts, 20% melee damage to brutes, 50% extra melee damage to craze, and 150% extra damage while our shields are full. And those are just our augments adding all of that. Plus in Season 0 right now we have a mutator called Overwhelming Power that gives you 25% extra damage by just shield harvesting enemies, and it stacks 10 times, so you can get an extra 250% bonus damage for free. But here's where things get a bit confusing. From my testing, there are very few stats or percentages in the game that are multiplicative, meaning most of the damage calculations don't take 750% times 400% in order to get crazier damage numbers like Diablo does. So it's not going to be easy for a lot of builds to get crazy high damage and get to Mastery 200 because a lot of the stats are just additive. We can obviously scale our damage unbelievably high compared to the base damage numbers we're shown on the item cards, but there's still a bit of mystery around how we can. I have sat here for hours or days even, like I said earlier, and tested a large number of different stats and different items in the game. My friends and I have sat down and put our brains together trying to figure out how certain things work as well. All because I want to give you as much information as I can to help your build crafting. So I'm going to try to put as much useful information here without making this video like 45 minutes long, or without making a third of it being math class. But Manny actually in his testing found out that shield harvest damage seems to be multiplicative. It's one of the few damage types in the game that can scale this high with other damage bonuses, augments, or talent tree nodes as well. On top of that, I was able to figure out that the villain synergy Terror Behind the Mask seems to not only be a multiplicative percent value, but it also seems to focus on the final damage dealt. That means if you scale your damage up to 10 million for a shield harvest and then trigger 500% extra damage from Terror Behind the Mask, that 10 million becomes 50 million. That's partially how we are able to get those thick with 3 C's damage numbers that we are getting, or I guess 3 digits. And the most recent discovery that we made for multiplicative stats is the augment that gives you 50% more damage when your shield is full. You can put this augment on 3 different items, your shield, neck bomb, and lucky charm. That will give you an overall multiplicative damage buff of 150% when your shields are full. I'll talk more about why this one is so good in just a second though. But because there seems to only be a few stats in the game thus far that appear to be multiplicative, or at the very least stats or percentages that multiply the final damage number you deal and not base damage, there's going to be a very select few stats everybody will want to use in order to increase their damage output. Everyone's eventually going to be running the same stuff. And I have faith there are more out there. We are basically on the hunt for the stats that will increase your damage to the highest the fastest. That's the simplest way of explaining the term damage bucket that I used in my last video. It's why every build in the higher mastery tiers needs a stacked deck, because the 750% damage bonus scales the final damage number we see, and not base damage. Same thing for Terror Behind the Mask, Villain Synergy, and Shield Harvest damage. I could go more in depth on the math of this game or how certain stats work if you would like me to, but for now, I will keep it simple, and I will show you what all of that math does to your build, and why testing this stuff is very, very important. Let's get it. The gameplay you are about to see is from a viewer of mine named Just Die. He is one of the only people I know hitting Mastery 200 after the burn fix, without hacking, and they are the person who helped me figure out that the 50% damage buff when your shield is full augment was multiplicative. I had reached out to them because I was curious as to what the build would look like when you were running the highest difficulty content in the game, and I wanted to see how the damage could scale. So after working with Just Die to run different tests, we found something very interesting. But really quickly, I would like to call out Axel and Rocksteady. Hi Axel, big fan. My name is Mr. J, and I was recently made aware that you love it when people break your game when Derek popped into my stream the other day. I was told that Rocksteady would love the ideas that I had up my sleeve. So here I am, delivering the breakage on a silver platter. So please, sit back and enjoy. This is my build at Mastery 200. This is the power behind the build. Just Die was running incursions and ran through it like it was easy. Not abusing a bug, not hacking, no exploits. This is the power of math. Hitting for hundreds of millions of damage like we are Toy Man seducing Rabbit for all of his frickin' credits. Effortlessly. And Axel, the reason you were called out is because while we were testing this build, we noticed something. While we watched the damage get higher and higher, shattering Boomer's glass ceilings, no big deal, we saw 400 million, 800 million, 900 million damage for a shield harvest. Just Die was a trooper and kept trying to hit the infamous 1 billion damage with a shield harvest. That was our goal. That was our curiosity. Suddenly, he messages me a clip. This clip, to be exact. He hit a 999.9 million shield harvest. We both were so hyped, but also so blue-balled. Because either it was pure coincidence, or it was an internal cap on shield harvest damage. Just Die said that they would continue trying. They were dedicated to getting that 1 billion damage. Channeling their inner Dr. Evil, they cranked out incursion after incursion. But then, after about a day or so later, I got a message. They told me they noticed something odd. They also noticed that occasionally when they would shoot a destroyer, they would just pop for the rest of their entire health pool. But the damage number was either completely gone, or would show up as a small number like 1.3k. So we tested more and more, and what we came up with is that for someone like myself who's on Mastery 69, nice, there are lots of times where I would shoot an enemy and a huge chunk of their health would rip off, but no damage number would show up. Or they would completely pop. It didn't really matter what health they had left, I could get this to happen. But then after I would pop them for that damage, or the invisible damage actually, then my next melee or shotgun blast would hit them for like 150, 200, 300 million damage. So I knew at that point my damage had spiked high enough to where Sucker Punch and Bonanza would be adding half of the damage that I dealt. This would happen so much, it basically was anytime I fought a brute or destroyer or really anything. But it's not just the fact that my damage numbers don't pop up. I also noticed that on my damage, I would hit them for maybe 500k with my shotgun, or maybe like 5 million or something, but the destroyer's health would have an enormous chunk taken out of it, like I hit it for like 200 million or 50 million or something. I've also seen destroyers go from the first health bar to the last one in one hit, while the damage numbers might only show like 10 million damage. So, after some thinking, I realized that the enemies at my level simply don't have enough health to even display the damage I'm truly doing. Either that, or there is some kind of internal limit to the damage you can actually deal within certain mastery tiers or brackets, or something funky going on behind the scenes with damage numbers. But basically what is going on is my peak damage used to be around 345 million for one shot or one shield harvest. But now that I've made a few changes to my build, and we've discovered more multiplicatives in the game, now my damage is consistently above the threshold for the damage limits, or whatever is causing my damage numbers to disappear. So what that means is that while we see numbers like 1 million, 5 million, 10 million per pellet of my shotgun, the numbers we aren't seeing are in the hundreds of millions potentially. That's why I don't get 300 million hits anymore, and I rarely get anything above 80 to 150 million. Because the math is making my damage scale exponentially due to utilizing the multiplicative stats in the game, plus a bunch of additive stats as well. So it can very easily skyrocket into the hundreds of millions. That means I'm dealing damage equal to someone on Mastery 200 while only in Mastery 69. And I won't even know what my true damage is until I get to Mastery 200, because those are the only enemies that have enough health to actually show me damage numbers. And again, Axel, it has been a pleasure, my dude, but here's where we broke it. Just Die kept grinding incursions trying to get the highest number possible. After all, we couldn't accept the possibility of a 1 billion damage cap for shield harvest. I was testing different gear and looking at different stats in an attempt to find out how we achieved such high damage. But that's when Just Die noticed that in their game, they would get the same thing as me, where the brutes or destroyers would instantly pop for their entire health pool. But the difference was that mine showed no damage number because of some kind of lack of enemy health or some kind of internal limit. Just Die situation was a little different because when they popped the brute or destroyers, they would either see no damage numbers, or they'd see very, very tiny numbers numbers like 1K, 1.2K, 1.9K. We thought it was just a bug where you could instantly kill brutes and it would bug the damage to be tiny, but we both thought it was really weird how frequently it kept happening for him. But then, Just Died jokingly said, what if that's a billion damage? Like it's 1.2k million. And that's when it clicked. Those small numbers, those 1k, 1.2k, 1.9k, 1.5k, whatever it is, those are billions. This game just doesn't put a B for billion. Instead, the game acts like an odometer in a car. When you go above 999,999,999, the entire thing just resets and starts over. And the reason it doesn't show 1 damage or 2 damage is because the lowest damage value you can do in the game is still in the thousands. So not only are we consistently hitting for hundreds of millions of damage, but we are also hitting for billions of damage. Basically, we don't even know the peak of this build's damage. So with great honor and pride, I present to you the new best build in the entire game. And to help introduce this build, I believe this clip will summarize it perfectly.
No one likes to show off.
Unless what they're showing off is dope as fuck.
This build does not require counters like the Bizarro shot builds. This build is not just spamming grenades. This build has repeatedly hit over 1 billion damage on Mastery 200. This build can also run through any of the 3 incursions right now, and it's only going to get better when they change the boom mutator as well. You are focusing on buffing your base damages for your shotgun and melee as much as you can, because those 2 damage pools will directly feed into the other ones, making them stack higher and higher. So the more base damage you have for each shot or each melee, the higher each stack can be initially. And once you trigger the multiplicative percent values for damage bonuses, the cyclically multiplicative, or in proper English, exponential damage scaling starts. And to Rocksteady, sorry we made you turn the health scaling down on the higher incursions. We didn't really know the map. You can turn them back up now. Okay, thanks. I need targets with more health. I'm sure the brutes and destroyers I've been bullying for the last week while sciencing this would like me to pick on someone my own size. Oh, and as far as I know, this entire build isn't some bug, some glitch, or an exploit that we are abusing. It's just really good math. I could understand how some people would think this is going to get nerfed, but my counterpoint is that this build isn't OP, other builds are just weak and need a buff. If they want us to hit Mastery 200 while having as much build diversity as possible, we need more buffs than nerfs. And also, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Rocksteady for featuring my last video in their March 1st developer update article. A lot of you probably found me from that article, and I really appreciate Rocksteady for the shout out, and I appreciate all of you for the kind words and all of the new subscribers from that video. And because of Rocksteady's shout out, we are now at over 8,000 subscribers. That is so cool. I never thought I'd make it here, and I could not have done it without all of you. I have plenty of other content planned, so I do hope you enjoy your stay here. I hope this video helped you. If it did, feel free to leave a like on the video. It would mean a lot to me if you did do that. But I also want to give a special shout out to the members on this channel. We've had a ton of amazing humans who have become supporters of this channel, so many in fact, that I will now have to speed read the names of all the members like I'm the guy on TV reading the side effects for new medication. So, special thanks goes to my amazing girlfriend Nerd, I love you my Harley. Then we have Ghosting You, Ethan Becker, Future 14K, Retrospec, Harlow's Quinn 420, Eric Grubb, Eric E, Sendoa 09, Behemoth Titan 1031, Champagne Poppy, Chris Main Niranen, Nanostorm, Sheila, Ibershed, Liam Gibson, Ozzy Dead Andrew, Han, Spatzer and High Scoven, Nigel Johnson, Traditional Artist, JR, Smoking Aces, Gav, Adrian Schnell, Bane Aces, Sketch 2805 Studios, I'm Isborn, Asuna, Definitive, Flaws, Nightwing, Anderson Fuentes, Shadow the Ghost, Agent Reaper, Colton, Lottie, Goober316, Rabbit, Emperor Frieza, Dark Dimension, BJ, Protonite, Cyclone22, MediWarrior45, Spider Skywalker, Manny, and Green Ranger 32. Thank you for supporting this channel and for being the nerdiest of the nerds. This community is growing at a pace I never thought possible, and this channel's growth would not be possible without all of you, so thank you. And if you were looking for like-minded people who just love this game and want to see it grow and flourish, you are on the right channel. And if you want to find other people to play with when they fix the multiplayer bug, join my Discord. I will leave a link to join it in the video's description. We have an amazing community of people in there from my Twitch and YouTube communities added together, and there's a bunch of people in there who are always willing to play. If you would like to support this channel even further, you can always click that join button on my channel and join the nerdiest of the nerds as well. The support is never forced or expected, but it is tremendously helpful, and I will always be very, very appreciative of all that you guys do to help my dreams be a reality. I wouldn't be here without all of you. But also, I want to know, how hyped are you for Season 1? Are you going to play the Joker? Let me know in the comments down below. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your way out. Thank you so much for watching. Later, nerds!
Oh yeah, it's just fucking glowing. It's beautiful. Then you start spinning it around and they chase you. It does actually. I'm a little moist.
You're moist.
Next time you're feeling a little frisky, just take your thumb and pop. Dude, the first time I ever heard that, it was literally some random fucking dude in the mall. I didn't know him. He just came up and said that to me.
Oh my god!
Go into the doctor's office, drop your pants, like, all right, let's do this. Sir, this is a dentist. I have a very interesting relationship with my dentist. I promise it's consensual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Little twisty, twisty, shifty, shifty. The come hither finger? Is that what it's called?
Down, down, and swinging and swinging.